Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Zach Galifianakis has been popping up on some podcasts with some takes lately. I think that he's doing a press run for a Netflix show, like a gardening Netflix show. I don't know. He's got an interesting vibe these days. For anyone who hasn't kept up with Zach Galifianakis or doesn't know who that is, that's the guy from The Hangover. Got super famous off of that character alone and has done some interesting work since then. Is a really interesting, unique comedian, but didn't necessarily catch on either. And I'm not sure if he has a bunch of money or if he wanted to, have a more illustrious career. He's made a little bit of comments to that effect, in this recent press run, but nothing too decipherable. But one thing that he's speaking up about is the sort of new age podcast style of talking to politicians and just being very softball about it. And in his view, not doing your job as a comedian, which is to play the court jester and joke to their face in a way that actually is not meant to make them comfortable. And so he has landed on this critique as a contrast from his show Between Two Ferns that he did that was very popular for a while around the Obama era and then leading into the 2016 Hillary Clinton era. And so in a couple of these interviews, he has contrasted or been asked to contrast those two interview styles and has some interesting thoughts on it. So here's him talking to Conan O'Brien about, in his opinion, why comedians aren't doing their jobs.
That was particularly helpful to you when you did your famous Between Two Ferns interview with Obama, because you're the only person that gave him, I know that this in any way was just you doing your comedy, but you were so rude as that person. Right. And it's hilarious because I don't think anyone's talked to, certainly a sitting president, or even in this time, no one's talked that way.
Well, all the
to a
podcasters
president
that have had the president on now, they don't do their court gesture. They don't do it. They suck up to him.
Yeah.
So the comedians
Yep.
that are podcasters that have had Trump on, they're not doing their job.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the job of a comedian. You are to challenge.
Yeah.
You are to make uncomfortable. You're not to sit there and fake laugh.
Yep.
That is not the job of the court jester.
Yeah.
Period. So there is a difference. Somebody yesterday was talking to me about that, about, political influence through comedy and all that stuff. I'm more interested in the comedy first.
Me too. Yeah. No,
I'm whatever their motive is, fine. But the comedy has to come first. I remember when I interviewed Hillary Clinton, and I could tell she didn't want to be there, and I totally get that. I get it. But before we had set that whole thing up, they wrote back, well, you can't bring up those emails. And I go, well, we don't have to do the interview. That's fine. We won't do it.
Yeah.
When you tell powerful people no, it's crazy. They were like, okay, we'll do it. Well, you can ask. Yeah. Because it's not that important to me to do it the way they want to do it. You have to, if you're going to come in a comedy, you got to do the way we want to do it.
I mean, no one walked away from your interview with Obama and thought, wow, you really showed him. He got to be hilarious. He sat there and entered your world of, being intentionally ignorant about who he is, what he does, cutting him off, being insanely rude, and gave it back to you in equal measure. And you looked at it and you thought, this is a great piece of comedy. And I know it reflects well back on the president. And our current president would do well to understand that, if he let himself be the butt of the joke,
That's impossible.
It's humanizing. I know it is impossible.
You wouldn't do it with him.
It wouldn't work. No.
It wouldn't work. But there's also the math of comedy to me sometimes, where the punching down that the right seems to do and I don't want to get political here, but that's not as funny to me as taking on the powerful. Like the math of it doesn't work for me. Like to take on some marginalized people, make fun of that. listen, I'm all for humor. I can defend it, but that mathematically, so that's why you don't see a lot of comedy that comes out of the right. It's hard to do. I'm not suggesting you cannot. It's just difficult to do because of the dynamics.
Yeah.
Greg Gutfeld.
Yeah, so it's funny that the only name he drops here is Gutfeld. It's funny that he has a particular distaste for Gutfeld. And his takes on all of this stuff are pretty interesting. Without delving too deep into his politics, he seems like a pretty liberal guy, but also he comes from Appalachia. So a lot of times when he's talking about these politics, he's kind of speaking from an understanding lens in terms of why some people in rural communities or more disconnected communities feel the way they feel or have the type of affinity towards a Trump figure or just right-wing politics that they might have. So it's an interesting perspective that it gives him, which I think has led him to have thought about this, right? Like with Obama. And at the time when he interviewed Obama, he may not have really thought too much of it like it was that controversial of a thing to do, right? Like there might be some people who are mad at him, people back in his hometown who hate Obama, but even they would probably be pretty impressed by the fact that he interviewed the president. So I think there was a little bit less critical thought about that at the time. And especially if you fall more on the liberal side. And you could say the same thing about Mark Maron. And the culture definitely changed surrounding that. So I think it is a fair critique to say the softball approach to these interviews does look much worse in an era where we see how bad it's gotten with Trump and how much has been let in the door through that. And Galifianakis' point here is that by creating a more challenging environment and also forcing them to agree to those terms, you essentially are doing your job more. And you're not capitulating to them, which I liked that he said that about Hillary Clinton in particular, that he was like, we don't have to do this interview. This is what the project is. And if that's not going to work for you, then we can say no. And that ability to use your leverage, first of all, to be able to actually walk away, right? To walk away from the interview, but also to have enough sway and enough of an audience that it still makes it worth it for them to do it anyway, right? And in a lot of ways, the Hillary Clinton example is more comparable to people interviewing Trump because when he interviewed Hillary Clinton, she was running for president. And Obama was actually already in his second term by the time they did this interview. So while I think the Obama interview, frankly, was a little bit softer on him or allowed him to come away looking better than the Hillary interview did, he went pretty hard on Hillary Clinton. And he says here, which I find interesting, that she genuinely didn't want to be there, which I wouldn't have necessarily guessed because it's part of the bit, right? That they're buying into this premise that they're going to get kind of made fun of. And there are certain points where it does seem like she plays into the joke. I'm not going to play this clip here from this old video. You should go watch it, though. It's only like 5 minutes, and it is a classic. And he is harsh on her. And so I think it's a great example. This interview in particular, more so than the Obama one, is a great example of like what a comedian's job is in this instance, and the fact that he didn't compromise when it came to what Hillary Clinton wanted him to compromise on and said, listen, we just don't have to do it if that's the case, which forced them to come back to the table. And also the fact that she was running at the time and he didn't kiss her feet, especially not because she was like, the opposite of Trump. And so that's so much better. So frankly, that probably went into the calculus of interviewing her in the first place. And he says here in regards to Obama and maybe just with the show in general that it's like you are presenting the politician. You're putting them out there to make their case. So that's part of it. You wouldn't do an episode with somebody that you didn't feel should be seen by anyone. And obviously the president has a certain privilege to that. I don't know that it was on the table for Trump to do a show like this at the time, but it probably wouldn't have happened because that cultural barrier had not been broken. So this is, I just think, an interesting crossover moment here because while Galifianakis is less relevant these days, and I think that's by choice, I don't think he has an interest in piping up in the conversation all the time, but he clearly has thoughts about this. He has thoughts similar to Mark Maron and other critiques that we've heard from certain comedians about the way that the right-wing comedy style has leaned on punching down in a way that essentially fucks up the math, is the way that he puts it. Or essentially he's just saying it feels less fair, it feels more cheap, or like it's less fair game. And while I think that is true, it feels a little bit outdated in its critique because what you get coming from the other side, their view on it, is that the wokeness, right, the tying together of all of these different identities, or just the general like mob mentality online, when it all is harmonized on the same thing, that essentially becomes this like authority figure. And then in the case of Dave Chappelle, you know, talking about going directly against like trans ideology in his view, and the trans lobby and various groups that do exist to put pressure on public figures or institutions to distance themselves from people spreading transphobia, to try to disincentivize people from doing that on such a public stage. So people who are disconnected from the fact that advocacy groups like that are advocating for people on the ground, a real cause that really exists, they just come to view it as this like political force that's trying to silence them. And that ultimately is the critique coming from the right that has been turned into this wokeness argument that has been used to tear away at so much progress, right? So much is tied into the category of woke just because to them that became some sort of authority figure that was pushing them around. So to me, what that says is that the surface level approach to those type of what you could call identity politics, which many would argue is what characterized the Obama era, the Obama-Clinton style of politics, you know, surface level identity politics that are not aimed at structural economic change. And so that resulted in essentially people perceiving the powers that be, the essentially capitalist and imperialist structures that are already there, offshoring of jobs for cheaper labor, dismantling of factories, hitting the Rust Belt the hardest, etc. This was dressed up with the face of inclusive ideology in their view. So the reason I think people came to like Trump is under that umbrella of viewing themselves as under attack from like the woke mob or from these authority figures that emerge from a general public consensus. In some cases, you could argue it's somewhat manufactured. I think that's the type of paranoia that these comedians find themselves in when they purposely wade into controversial waters and then get hit with a bunch of arrows or are suddenly faced with like societal level pushback, right? And it's something that scares the shit out of you, but also tempts you to stand up against it as hard as you can. And so I think people started to relate to Trump about that, and it made them want to allow him to get away with a lot because they felt like they didn't want to participate in being that cultural force that is browbeating, that especially the second time did not ever succeed in quelling the issue of Trump. And the reason for that is because at no point was the structural economic issue addressed. And there's really not one structural issue behind Trump other than like maybe money and politics, just general corruption and the absolute broken state of any type of anti-corruption action in the government is exactly what allowed Trump to claw to power. And it's ironic because he was saying so the whole time. He was telling us how corrupt he is the whole time, but because people viewed him as this sort of renegade figure who was doing, you know, going against the system and playing that relatable role because the media was taking the bait on every single thing that he wasn't supposed to be saying and was not addressing the structural issues. And they were focusing on jingoistic narratives about our enemies trying to influence elections, which was partially true and was even true on the issue of Trump. They definitely wanted Trump to win and they succeeded. But at the end of the day, there are huge structural issues in America that led to Trump. And part of that is the election system itself and the financing of that, which never got mentioned even a whiff in the media in the wake of 2016. So that was a long ramble, but I'll tie it up at the end here real quick. Let me play another clip of Zach Galifianakis talking more about the Obama interview, his logic behind doing that, and whether he feels culpable in this culture of politician podcasting.
Do you feel at all implicated by having Obama on Between Two Ferns?
Implicated?
In so much as like that to some people might be like, is this a real interview? What is this doing? Is this comedy or is this mess? In so much as it is a sort of abstract space of not clear lines of, is this entertainment or is this a political message?
It's tough now because the podcasters have become just ass kissers for the politicians, right? They don't challenge them. They're just like, oh, yeah, that's cool, right? And that I don't want to do. Like, we challenged Obama.
Yeah.
We made it uncomfortable for him in a way that was done for comedic effect. Yes, so he could get his message off for healthcare. Yes, that was a thing that he was doing. But I first need to entertain people. That's my whole thing. And to see a goofy comedian with a very well-respected gentleman that's our president, I mean, it kind of writes itself already. So do I regret? No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if it was an endorsement or I just was more interested in I definitely believed in healthcare for sure.
Yeah.
That was something that I was so excited about, because if you have a healthy house, you have a better house, right? If you have a healthy country, you have a better, that's just simple math of it to me. Then the politics get in the way.
If I had to put it simply, what I do feel Galifianakis does differently and why I feel like his style of interviewing politicians at the time, while it was a little bit milquetoast by nature just because it was kind of a part of liberal discourse and the things Trump was discussing even on these more mainstream podcasts was like edgy right-wing politics. So by its very nature, it's different. But part of the reason it works with Galifianakis is because he's not buying their shit as a character. The character isn't buying their shit, especially in the case of Hillary Clinton. That's what makes the interview work and worth watching, frankly, is that he is presenting arguments, even if they're just momentary jokes that they move right on from. He's presenting arguments like the trade agreement that Obama made, that Hillary Clinton said she supported and then said she didn't support, or the fact that Obama is weak. He says, does Obama like his coffee like he is? Weak. These are jokes that kind of cut to the core of their political project at the time. And that's the kind of thing that the podcasters weren't doing because they bought Trump's shit. And it's even more embarrassing because I don't know how anyone could buy Trump's shit really at this point. But they did. They bought into this like Teflon Don. This is the guy everyone wants to take down. And on top of that, he just wants to cut taxes for the rich. So things will probably be stable and we'll make more money. And at the worst, the poors will complain and we'll deal with that. But the reason that those guys have to own it more, and they're really mad about this now, but they have to own it more because they bought it and they helped present that image to their audience without cutting against it, without cutting into the sham that is not only Trump, but any politician. Trump to a greater extent than every other politician, but still, they're all a sham to an extent. And that's why the Between Two Ferns format works. And as far as the broader critique about, these people feeling like they're up against this sort of like societal, authority figure of wokeness, some of them extrapolate that into communism and other sorts of projections. Really what they're afraid of there is cultural power and cultural sway. And what they refer to as wokeness, which has been weakened in the past few years, is that cultural groundswell around things like racism, misogyny, whatever, that can be effective weapons against people financially, politically, candidates, or to get certain political action at the forefront. And so really the political power of that is not to be abandoned. However, I think that it needs to evolve into a more class-focused approach, because that same cultural momentum, which will exist, at the end of the day, it exists because there's more people who feel that way, and there's more people on that instinctual side of these conversations, that those groundswells happen naturally. But aiming that energy in a more class-focused direction, which I hope will be the natural progression, is the way that we can push past this sort of like endless woke versus non-woke conversation onto the next stage, which is, yes, this is cultural power being utilized using free speech and other levers of communication to the end of undermining capitalist power and reducing inequality. That is really what they project wokeness to be. But that's not really what it was under the type of liberal leadership that we've had in the past. So that's the evolution that I would like to see in leftist rhetoric. And it's not to say we don't focus on, marginalized groups and like their individual experiences and needs. But at the same time, I think that real cultural power that will glue everybody together in solidarity is that class focus. And that is what they really fear wokeness to be.